The struggle with the Pharaoh. The first thing the prophet Moses did when he arrived in Egypt was to find his brother, the prophet Aaron. The prophet Aaron already knew about what happened and said, "Dear Moses, Allah has informed me about the same things he told you." Together, they started waiting for the holy order for them to visit the Pharaoh. Finally, the expected order came, and together they went to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was very surprised to see the prophet Moses and his brother after so many years. He wasn't expecting this at all. He asked them, "Why have you come here?" They started to explain the reason they were there and said, "We are the messengers of the Creator of the universe. Allah has sent us to invite you to follow the right way. Don't torture our people anymore. Set them free so they can go to their holy land." The Pharaoh was leaning against his throne and listening to the prophet Moses in surprise. Was this the same Moses who had grown up in his palace? How could he dare to do something like this? He just couldn't understand. When the prophet Moses finished talking, the Pharaoh said angrily, "What has come over you, Moses? Aren't you the child that we brought up, went and killed an Egyptian and then ran away? Now you have come here before me and are telling me all these things." The Pharaoh was thinking of making the prophet Moses feel sorry for his guilt and make him remember that he had killed an Egyptian. The prophet Moses gave this reply to what the Pharaoh said. "Dear Pharaoh, the reason you brought me up is due to your own evilness. It is something you should be ashamed of. If you hadn't killed the baby sons of the Israelites, then what would I have been doing with you? My father and mother could have brought me up just as well. As for the killing of the Egyptian, it was an accident that happened without my control. There was no way for me to prove that I was innocent. This is why I had to run away from Egypt. Then later on, Allah taught me a science and gave me a gift. He also made me his messenger. He has sent me here to stop your evil ways." The Pharaoh couldn't say anything to the prophet Moses after his explanation and realized that this was a serious situation. It was clear that the prophet Moses wouldn't be an easy opponent. In order to heat up the disagreement between them, the Pharaoh asked, "So Moses, who is this Allah you talk about?" The prophet Moses replied, "Allah is the one that is the creator of the earth and the skies and everything between. He is Allah. He is the God of your ancestors and of the ancestors who lived before us. He is the owner of the west and the east and all that stands between." The prophet Moses was saying that everything in the universe belonged to Allah. He was suggesting that the Pharaoh, who saw himself as a holy person, was someone who would live and die just like everything and everyone else. With these words, the Pharaoh got very angry and said, "I swear to you that if you believe in another God than me, I will throw you into the dungeons." The prophet Moses gave this reply, "What if I prove the things I say? Will you still throw me into the dungeons?" The Pharaoh didn't think he would ever prove it and accepted his offer. "Show me this proof and let's see." The prophet Moses then threw his staff on the ground, and all of a sudden it turned into a snake. It was slithering around and left everyone in shock. The Pharaoh and his men stared at it with fright. The prophet Moses then showed the second bit of proof. After placing his hand on his chest, it started shining like a lamp and spreading light everywhere. The Pharaoh and his men were left in amazement. It was hard to deny the miracles they had seen. However, to accept them was out of the question. After their amazement had passed, the first thing they thought of was magic. This man has turned into a great wizard. In those days, Egypt was the heart of magic. The Pharaoh then felt relieved. He had the most talented wizards there, and they could easily beat Moses. With this in mind, he made this offer to the prophet Moses. "Moses, are you trying to overthrow me and take my country from me with your magic tricks? Hold on there. We have many wizards here. Let's see if you could win a contest against them." The prophet Moses happily accepted this offer. The faith of the wizards. On a day that had been decided, the local people gathered in front of the palace. The Pharaoh had called the most famous wizards of his country. The wizards entered the palace area amongst the cheering crowds. The prophet Moses and the prophet Aaron took their places opposite the wizards. The Pharaoh's wizards were sure that they would win the competition. There was no one better than them in the whole country. Feeling proud and showing off, they turned and said to the Pharaoh, "Will you give us rewards when we win?" The Pharaoh got up from his throne and said, "Yes, I will. You will have great prestige, and your every wish will be done." The wizards showed off even more before the Pharaoh's offer and said to the prophet Moses, "Will you start or shall we?" The prophet Moses replied, "You go ahead." The wizards then threw their sticks and ropes on the floor, and they turned into snakes. They were moving around everywhere and had everyone very scared. The wizards started to shout with joy. "We swore on the holiness of the Pharaoh that we will beat Moses." The prophet Moses had felt worried over what he had seen. However, Allah gave him this revelation. "Don't be scared, Moses. You are superior to them. Throw your staff on the ground. They are not doing anything magical. They are using tricks. There is no escape or success for the wizards. Soon their tricks will be revealed and they will look very bad in front of everyone." That holy consolation helped Moses feel much better, and he threw his staff on the ground. As soon as it fell on the ground, the staff turned into a horrible dragon and started to swallow all of the snakes. The local people and the wizards all watched in amazement. There wasn't a single snake left. The prophet Moses then held the dragon with his hands and it turned back into a staff. The wizards couldn't believe their eyes. What the prophet Moses did couldn't have been magic because there was nothing left behind of the tools that were used. There was no one else on earth that knew magic better than them. So they were sure that this wasn't magic, but a miracle. The prophet Moses truly was a prophet sent by Allah just as he had said. All of the wizards had now believed in what happened. They all bowed down in excitement. "We believe in Allah's Moses and Aaron." All these events happened in front of the local people. The prophet Moses was proved to be true when the wizards bowed down before him. The Pharaoh and his men were humiliated. He got very angry at the wizards bowing down to the prophet Moses and warned them by saying, "How can you believe in Moses without my permission? It is plain obvious that Moses was your master. You learned magic from him. I will cut off your feet and your hands and hang you all one by one from a date tree. Then you will know what it means to believe in Moses." The Pharaoh straight away found an excuse for his defeat and had announced the prophet Moses as their master. This was actually nothing other than a fake excuse in order not to believe in Moses. The wizards had all genuinely believed in Moses with all of their hearts and didn't care about the Pharaoh's threats. "Dear Pharaoh, we definitely believe in the honesty of Moses and in the existence of Allah. It has now come out into the open that you are truly a liar. We are not afraid of you. We are proud to be the first ones to believe Moses. You can only make us suffer in this life. However, Allah may welcome us to his heaven in the other world and give us eternal peace." This reply made the Pharaoh angrier than ever. He ordered the wizards to be put into the dungeons to be punished. The troubles that the Pharaoh faced. The Israelites started believing in the prophet Moses after he had defeated the Pharaoh. They accepted him as the saviour they had been waiting to come for many years to lead them to their holy land. The Pharaoh was very worried about this and started to use more force and suffering towards the Israelites. The condition of the Israelites was very sad. The torment and the pain they suffered tested their patience. They complained to the prophet Moses, "We were being tormented before you came, and we still are. What is the difference?" The prophet Moses told them to be patient and never lose hope. It would all end very soon. The Pharaoh and the people of Egypt insisted on not believing in the prophet Moses, even though he defeated the Pharaoh. They were ignoring the prophet Moses' wish to set the Israelites free. But Allah gave them some big disasters and troubles to break their stubbornness. The overflowing of the River Nile. At first, the River Nile overflowed because of the heavy rain. The city was covered in water and turned into a place where no one could live any longer. The people realised that this disaster had fallen upon them because of the Pharaoh. They asked the Pharaoh to do what the prophet Moses wished and end the disaster. The cruel Pharaoh had no choice and called for the prophet Moses and said, "Moses, if you stop this torment right away, I will release your people." The prophet Moses then felt hopeful and prayed to Allah. The water from the River Nile started slowly to recede and the city once again became a place to live. However, the Pharaoh didn't keep his word and started tormenting the people again once the disaster had gone. The Israelites were suffering great pain and torture. The locust plague. What the Pharaoh did angered Allah, and a couple of days later, millions of locusts came rushing into the gardens and fields in Egypt. The locusts ate all the harvest and started attacking the houses and people too. The Egyptians came face to face with famine, and no peace was left in the city. They blamed the Pharaoh once more, and then he called for the prophet Moses once again. He renewed his old offer. The prophet Moses then prayed to Allah, and the locusts left Egypt. The lice plague. The Pharaoh didn't keep his promise again, and Allah then sent lice onto the people. The people couldn't clean themselves of the lice that stuck onto their flesh and clothes. Their skins were in a terrible condition because of the scratching, and they were covered in blood. They felt like they were going crazy. The Pharaoh called for the prophet Moses once again and asked him to make them go away. The Pharaoh said that he would release the Israelites if he did so. And so the prophet Moses prayed to Allah once more, and the disaster was stopped. The frog plague. The cruel and rebellious Pharaoh didn't keep his promise once again and continued to torture the Israelites. This time, the people came face to face with even a greater disaster. Millions of frogs came out of the watermills, swamps and rivers. They entered streets, houses and rooms and went into beds, into food and water. There was no room to even walk because of the frogs. The Pharaoh begged the prophet Moses to stop this horrific disaster once more and said, "If you send these frogs away, I will release your people." The prophet Moses prayed to Allah in hope that the Pharaoh would keep to his promise this time. However, the Pharaoh hadn't learned his lesson from this disaster and continued his cruelty. The waters turned into blood. One morning, the servants of the Pharaoh brought him a glass of milk to drink. The Pharaoh picked up the glass to drink from it, then saw that it was full of blood instead of milk. He threw the glass away and yelled at his servants, "Do you bring me blood to drink? I will cut you all up and throw you to the animals." The servants were very surprised too, and said that they had milked the cow themselves. At that moment, a big crowd of people had gathered in front of the palace and called to the Pharaoh, "Pharaoh, let go of the Israelites and save us from this torment." The Pharaoh replied, "What is happening? What disaster?" "All of the waters have turned into blood. The River Nile is flowing blood. We can't find water to drink or milk or honey. Let go of the Israelites. Let us be rid of this disaster." The matter was now clear, and it wasn't the servants' fault. Because of the Pharaoh's cruelty towards the Israelites, it had caused another disaster. The Pharaoh realized that he had no other choice than to do as the prophet Moses wished. Otherwise, this disaster would never stop. He sent his men to call the prophet Moses and the prophet Aaron. He told them, "This time I promise you for good, I am letting the Israelites go, only if you make this disaster go away." The prophet Moses prayed once more, and the water turned back to normal.